on the SuSanA Working Group 2 on markets and finance. I think we're going to explore in this meeting sort of some of the alternative financing mechanisms that are coming up within the wash sector, focusing on sanitation. We're going to look at explore a little bit on the blended financing models for accelerating progress for sanitation towards 2030. We've got two wonderful presenters today. We've got Dan Levigne. Is that correct, Dan? Am I saying that right? From WaterAid, who's
Close enough.
Close enough. Thanks. You can restate your name correctly in a minute. He's the WaterAid Senior Business Development Manager, and he's got 2 decades of experience working on this issue in the nonprofit sector. He works with trustees and staff of foundations to transform the management of water security, sanitation, hygiene, and climate change across Asia, Africa, and South America. This guy is amazing. And by finding and developing the best investment opportunities. I also want to note that this is going to be a series of workshops on sanitation and finance, or wash and finance, that we're going to put together. The timeline for that is a bit unclear, but we're going to look at, today we're looking at blended financing and impact investing. We're going to also have a session that's going to look at funds in sanitation. You might have heard there's a couple of interesting sanitation and hygiene funds that are out there right now, including the sort of newly formed Sanitation Hygiene Fund. And then we're also going to look at, engaging governments and private sector in finance. So I think that's going to be an exciting one too. We might even split that up depending on the content. Before I hand it over to Dan, and Dan, I'm going to let you introduce our colleagues from Aqua All, because I don't know exactly who's speaking, so I'll let you do that when you get. But I see we have 2 colleagues from Aqua All on the call. But before we go there, I just want to say 2 quick points. The first point is that I think I want to just caution everyone on the call. I think there's always this rush to look at finance when it comes to sanitation, and I think we need to base that work on finance based on a very clear market diagnostic of what's wrong in the market to begin with. What are those barriers, and why isn't the market for sanitation working? It's not always finance that's the priority. And so I think, we can't just knee-jerk go to finance. That's my first point. We need to really base that on good, very clear and good market diagnostics. And then the second thing is, what are we actually trying to do here? We're trying to sort of pave the way for governments and private sector, to play their role better in sanitation. So let's think of finance as, funds we're trying to unlock, right? Either from the private sector or from the government or from donors. So I think if we think of this unlocking, and I'm going to just take a second to talk about private sector, I think we can unlock a lot of private sector funds to solve this problem. Local private sector funds, like from, national, regional distributors, from retailers. If they see the business case for this, right? If the private sector actors see the business case for them, the money we need to raise from donors to solve this problem is going to depend on how well we address the market barriers that exist for the private sector, for them, the barriers that invest from them to get involved in in sanitation. If they see the business case, they'll find ways to get the money and put the money in. And they'll find their own capital, or they'll borrow capital. But right now, they're just not seeing the business case. So, I mean, for me, the real question is, why is that? Because there's too much risk, and so I think the donor money that we have really needs to go to things that de-risk the private sector entry. So those are my just 2 points I want to make. Don't rush to finance, and let's look at this as specifically unlocking for, the de-risking the private sector for entry and unlocking their funds, right? Like, we can talk about raising all this capital, but frankly, until the private sector start to raise their own capital, we're not going to get the progress we need. So those are just a couple of points to start. And for that, I'll hand over to Dan, correct?
Or yes, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I am just hopefully sharing the right documents. If I can just get it playing. There we go. Can people see that?
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you. I'm actually going to hand over to my colleague Sacha Gayama shortly to do the heavy lifting of this presentation, which is just as well because my neighbours have started loudly drilling. But Sacha and I both work in business development at WaterAid and are kind of leading what's really the beginning of an internal kind of journey exploring these kind of financing models. But I'll just start in case some people aren't too familiar with our organization, with the briefest of overviews, just to explain kind of how we've come to this point. So WaterAid was founded in 1981, so a long time ago, by the UK water industry. And as our name implies, we are a specialist wash organization trying to deliver clean water, decent toilets and good hygiene to everyone everywhere within a generation. Now, our focus has always been on the poorest and hardest to reach and most marginalized people. You can see from this graphic the 27 countries we work in Asia, Africa and Central America, and that we have fundraising offices in the USA, Sweden, Japan and Australia, in addition to our UK headquarters. Now we have always kind of had an ethos of trying to exemplify the best in wash development, so being the best and trying to influence the rest. And with that in mind, we, drawing on the expertise of our, water industry founders and ongoing partners, we have an interest in the entire enabling environment for sanitation and wash more broadly. And on top of that, we have a large policy and advocacy function. So some of the things that we do are listed here in terms of lobbying governments, sharing knowledge, and linking the communities we're trying to work with the people in the wider enabling environment that they need to get things done. Now you'll see the last 2 points on there are rallying support for the human right to water and toilets around the world, and changing attitudes and behavior, and seeing the really exciting ideas and potential of blended finance models and impact investing that other organizations like Aqua All have really taken a lead on, has really kind of inspired us to think harder about whether we should be rallying the support of these kind of investors and changing behaviors amongst all the interested parties to really try and address this gap in unlocking finance for WASH to achieve the difference we need to realize the SDG 6 by 2030. So Sacha, I'm going to hand over to you now so you can kind of outline what we're really talking about, and then Josien's going to go on and kind of really explain the kind of greater depth of experience that they've already got working with this as an organization.
Thanks, Dan. I've just asked control. Do I have it? Yes. Thanks, everybody. So I'm Sacha Gayama. Like Dan said, I work with Dan in the Trust and Foundations team within WaterAid. Before joining WaterAid, I worked for over a decade in investment banking, natural resources in particular. had a dabble in water infrastructure in the beginning of my career. I think what we're like Dan alluded to. I think we're in the WaterAid internally is in the beginning of a journey of being a lot more focused on our approach to this growing crowd of investors, impact investors, venture philanthropists. And actually, before I go any further, I think, can someone mute? I can hear some echo. I think if anyone who's not speaking can mute. I think there's one microphone that's unmuted. If you could, thank you. Oh, was it Josien? Oh, sorry. Okay. Dan, I can't seem to move the presentation forward, or is it taking there's a bit of a time lag here. What slide can you see?
So Sacha, I'm going to unshare and reshare it. I am
okay. All right.
Experiencing some difficulties. There we go. Giving you control again.
Thank you. Right. And so, yeah, it's still frozen. Dan, don't worry. If you can exit, I have the presentation open as well. I'll just share it on my screen. Thank you. Okay.
Are you able to do that, Sacha?
Yes. Right. Okay. I hope everyone has it now. Great. Okay. Like I was saying, Dan and I are currently corralling WaterAid internally to look more consistently at this growing crowd of donors and investors. We look at them together, impact investors and venture philanthropy. Obviously, they ostensibly started from different points. Impact investors from a more commercial, institutional investor starting point, venture philanthropy, as the name would indicate, starting from the philanthropy side, both having in common that they want to put their money to work towards commercial ventures that deliver positive social, environmental impacts. And I think the further reason that we sort of look at these two sort of groups together is really, and I think this spectrum sort of says what the current sort of distinction that people still make between the two. You have venture philanthropists and philanthropy, and those who are more geared towards grant making that traditionally have tended to invest in market-based ideas that had essentially higher business or market or enabling environment risk, as opposed to impact investors that, again, traditionally started from investment that had a more, quote unquote, bankable capacity, but also, sharing this intention to create social impact. But the truth is, and I think this sort of anchors the reason why Dan and I look at impact investors and venture philanthropists together, is that there really is at this current time almost a collapsing of the differences between these two types of investors. You have a lot more impact investors that are willing to either partner with NGOs or provide grant-like various forms of concessional, i.e., not entirely not commercial finance, to allow commercial ventures to succeed. So there is effectively still some distinction, but I think with the growth of things such as catalytic capital, as it's described, or patient capital more broadly, just taking longer concessional finance terms to support for-profit businesses. There's a collapsing really of that difference between impact investors and venture philanthropists. So we look at them again as the same, as increasingly the same audience. Now, I think the positive spin you could put to this is that the only way is up. And I think this is also clearly, water, sanitation, and hygiene have for a long time and still continue to take a very limited share of funds considered by impact investors and venture philanthropists. But at the same time, and I think this is why we're particularly keen and excited to have Josien on this call, there is undisputably a bubbling now, a groundswell of interest from impact investors, venture philanthropists in investing in commercial businesses within the wash sector. And there's obviously a lot of curiosity now as to how NGOs such as WaterAid and other wash agencies can help, create this momentum in the broader wash sector. And well, obviously, everyone here on this call is in the sanitation sector and knows that within wash, sanitation has always, had the smaller end, received the smaller end of the finance. So you would imagine that in this particular case, as this chart sort of highlights, it's a small amount for wash. So it's probably even smaller for in the sanitation space. But again, as Josien will probably highlight, there's a finally growing interest from this constituency, and we at WaterAid are quite keen to be a lot more consistent at targeting them. Now, this is obviously not a comprehensive list of risks, and I think many people on this call will be familiar with different types of risks and basically what John describes as barriers to why investment into wash and sanitation in particular hasn't been that forthcoming. There are overarching risks such as a general political risk, and obviously the visibility of water and sanitation as a human right, and therefore the political sensitivity of businesses around that. And how that sort of reflects on the choices of business models, how the services need to remain affordable whilst managing to be, again, bankable and a suitable credit risk. Not obviously all wash segments are the same, and so there are specific risks and barriers tied to particular segments. I think, for example, on the off-grid sanitation aspect of things, there's a lot of anecdotal experience, a lot of anecdotal evidence, and a lot of experience about what the technological risk, the technology risk around specific types of sanitation technologies mean in terms of the appetite that investors will have for them. And I highlighted small ticket size. That's probably more for the larger, I'd say, impact investor population as opposed to venture philanthropists. A lot of the sort of larger impact investors will often want a certain size of investment to be interested in talking directly with the wash agency or not. And obviously, I also highlighted the risk that we often associate with investing in commercial investments in low and medium income countries in terms of the enabling environment. So these are all, again, barriers that are generally within the sector sort of known. And I think a lot of what these impact investors and venture philanthropists expect from wash agencies increasingly is what role, what contribution can we make to de-risk effectively these various risks and part of the approach that Dan and I are internally progressing is just being a lot more consistent in what WaterAid's role should be in supporting businesses in overcoming these barriers in de-risking effectively these situations. Now, the reason why we sort of highlighted blended finance is that, and the reason I compounded these quotes together is that it really sort of expresses the contrast of whether how we look at it. We clearly, since the Addis Ababa conference, there's been a lot of promise and high hopes around the potential for looking at transactions in the blended finance way to bring in more commercial investors, and that includes obviously impact investors and venture philanthropists. But at the same time, obviously, the expectation isn't that the private sector finance, especially for a sector, like I said, as sort of politically visible as water and sanitation, the private sector won't close the entire gap to meeting the finance gap towards meeting SDG 6 by 2030. But if billions are still billions of dollars, and that is still clearly something that we can try to channel, especially given finally the rising interest amongst impact investors, venture philanthropists in the WASH space. Now, I don't want to be sort of giving a master presentation on blended finance. The truth is, we currently at WaterAid use use blended finance as a lens, really, to help internally the organization understand, where the different sources of funding are coming from, and how between concessional finance, i.e. finance that is for various reasons not commercial, either because of tenor, pricing, of repayment conditions, and commercial finance, finance that is, as it says, priced in accordance to expected market returns by investors. The reason that we use blended finance as a lens is that it allows the organization to see what the different sources of funding are, B, where WaterAid would like what sorts of funding WaterAid within that context would like to receive to carry out its work, and C, what kind of finance will effectively be deployed to support the businesses that WaterAid will be supporting and working with. Now, what does de-risking mean for WaterAid and other NGOs? Again, this is a live conversation internally about, again, just being very clear as to what roles we would like to play. We have played all of these roles in different capacities, whether as a funder of for-profit activities, as an intermediary introducing people to for-profit activities, as a technical assistance provider, obviously building capacity in WASH and related activities for commercial activities, independent evaluation, and I think this is a particular strength of WaterAid in the sort of advocacy and convening role. I think within the WASH agency space, we have a particularly strong advocacy arm and the ability to engage with policymakers and bring visibility to our activities and to activities that unlock the WASH activity is a very valuable one. And so it's one of the roles that we in particular are taking an interest in trying to tie our association with impact investors and venture philanthropists as a role to effectively contribute to de-risking commercial investments. Now, I highlight these two examples because a lot of the internal dialogue that we've had has been really demystifying for the internal audience the fact that we have, in all but in name, already engaged in transactions that can be described, or at least can be described as facilitation for impact investing using blended finance. As I said, I think the blended finance lens is something that we use now to help the organization see that its our existing activities beyond the beyond the jargon of investment finance, of investment banking and the jargon of blended finance. Our activities are effectively already aligned with some of the interest of this audience of impact investors and venture philanthropists. So Ada, who's on the call, will be familiar with what we've done in Mozambique with the MyBucks Banking Corporation. We effectively provided a first loss tranche to this bank to allow them to provide sanitation loans to SMEs. In Bangladesh, and there's a whole blog post about this by our team in WaterAid Bangladesh, we effectively launched a microfinance, partnered to launch a microfinance scheme in 3 rural districts. So that meant WASH NGOs, including WaterAid, creating demand, and I think this joins sort of John's earlier point about seeing the business case, we created demand for created demand for sanitation products, and obviously provided technical assistance to the potential household buyers in terms of what were the best sanitation products for their needs. And once that was done, they were able to apply for microloans to finance these sanitation microloans to finance the acquisition of these wash goods. At the same time, not only we partnered with this microfinance institution and allowed them to required them to create a savings account in order to effectively ensure that these investments that they were making in sanitation goods were sustainable in the long run. So the savings account would allow them to save for small repairs and maintenance, and just allow for the intended wash impact to last well beyond our intervention life cycle. So again, I'd encourage anyone to look into our blog links for that. But again, I think looking at these interventions, there's a clear sort of opportunity, if you look at them consistently, to invite an impact investor potentially to effectively take a commercial interest, whilst we, WaterAid, perform a number of roles between creating demand, providing technical assistance, and even providing some form of concessional finance if required and if justifiable. I'm going to end with this to sort of conclude our sort of WaterAid's the current state of WaterAid's exploration. Like I said, we're building a consistency in our approach to impact investors and venture philanthropists. The kind of activities that we are currently looking at, and where frankly WaterAid has existing experience in, include all of these. So microfinance-backed sanitation loans, or off-grid sanitation, so plugging gaps in the sanitation value chain where there are either gaps or where it's basically more justifiable in the context of decentralized sanitation space. Sanitation marketing is also an interesting place, although as many will understand, you know, it requires investors take a lot more early stage capital interest, a lot of patient capital to effectively support building a business case and building a demand for sanitation products. But again, we have a track record of having done sanitation marketing, and we're exploring if and how investors could take an interest in supporting sanitation marketing businesses all the way to a more mature state. COVID-19 for utilities, it's no secret that many utilities have had to sort of continue to operate, you know, even despite the fact that many of the bills remained unpaid. So there's a growing financing gap that needs to be thought about for these utilities. So we're thinking about that. And finally, probably more ambitiously, unlocking wholesale markets that would enable a wash-based market to emerge. I'm particularly thinking of in Nigeria. I think Ada will be familiar with this again. We recently were part of a study that revealed that one of the main blockages for a thriving sanitation market was effectively a lack of a wholesale distribution chain for these sanitation products. And so the idea of partnering with an investor who would not only obviously make a commercial return individually, but also contribute to unlocking a wider sanitation market altogether is something that's quite appealing, something that, again, we are one of the areas that we are currently looking at. With that, I think I will end our presentation, again, looking forward to hearing from Josien, and again, about this surge in interest, or the growing interest, I should say, in WASH from the impact investors and investors with a desire to make a positive impact in WASH and in general, and sanitation in particular. Thank you.
Thanks, Sacha. And I should have said before Sacha joined the development sector recently, he has an extensive background in finance and banking, so he's providing us with a lot of useful insights. Now, on that note, I'm very pleased to introduce the Chief Executive of Aqua All, Josien Sluijs. I hope I've said your name right. Aqua All have been quite an inspiration to us, really taking a lead with a number of initiatives and fantastic partnerships in the area of impact investing. So I shall hand over and let you tell everybody a bit more about that, Josien.
Thank you so much, Dan. Just to check, do you see the screen well?
Yes.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Dan. I very much appreciate it. Sacha, thank you for your very insightful presentation. And John also, I hope I will not forget to make some additional remarks as to a few of the things that you have indicated in your introduction. So my name is Josien Sluijs. I'm the Managing Director of Aqua All. And I also, just as Sacha, only entered the water and sanitation sector just over a year ago. And before that, I was working with and for impact investors. So when I saw that you could introduce many interesting topics to impact investors, but there is indeed a very urgent need for them to clearly understand when you move into a new sector. And for many of the impact investors, and you can see that in the percentages that were just given to us, only 1% of impact investment total funding is going into the water and sanitation sector. And from my experience, I see that investors need to have a clear understanding of risk and return. And on top of that, there also must be interesting investment opportunities. And so a few things were said already by John and Sacha about this, but I'll just begin at the slide that you all see here. When I entered as a managing director for Aqua All, I saw that there is a huge service gap, even beyond my expectations, when you look at the SDG 6. So still quite a number of people without access to safe drinking water and access to sanitation. And that doesn't only have a huge effect on their well-being, but also on economic results of a specific country. So when I started, I thought I need to speak to those entrepreneurs that are presented. And what I found out is that quite a number of them, and especially also in the sanitation sector, have extreme difficulty to enter their break-even point. One of the reasons is that every initiative grows grassroots level upwards. And secondly, margins are extremely thin, whereas we are used to also the government to invest in these kind of, as we call them, public services. There's often a lack in countries that we work in. And secondly, there are very high upfront investment needed in simply brick and mortar. And you need long-term funding for that, and that is simply not available in the market. So there is a financing gap. We already indicated, and you heard that in the presentations before, there's lack of sufficient public funding, and that is a fact. So we need private investments, and as to the point of John, that is not going to solve all our problems. And besides that, there is such a huge amount of funding needed that that's also not immediately ready when we are going to work alongside private investors to allow them to invest in the sector. So if we look at facts and figures, we see that there's 5 billion in donor funds available, and to meet SDG 6, we need 114. That is a huge gap. Still, I think that if we put a lot of effort, as does WaterAid, as does many of the others in the sector, we can at least start catalyzing funding to flow into the sector. And one other remark that I want to make is that as a start, we need successes. And even though that doesn't result in closing the gap, it will start an effect. But then again, how do you do that? There is a missing link between what we see out there in the market and the funding available, because funding in itself, money is out there. If we just simply need to get that into the sector, and how do you then do that? So examples given already, we need to start de-risking investors. We need to start de-risking entrepreneurs. But also I see that when you get private capital to flow into the sector, you will also see that there will become a different mindset. And that is what I've seen a long time already with different sectors that we try to push impact money into, is that once you move away with only foundation and government and grant money to be involved in the development of the sector, there is a click quite often. Because if you push private capital into a market in a segment, you see that there is difference in reporting, difference in, you know, things that need to be delivered. Sometimes even there's push for scale, which was often quite not possible only with public funding. So who is Aqua for All? We're a not-for-profit organization, much smaller than WaterAid, but still we try to push as much as you also do to get innovations and scale, and to really start to mobilize public and private capital as an investment in the sector. We present ourselves as that partner between, you know, being able to bridge the service gap and the financing gap that is out there. We've dealt with quite some grant money already, mostly allocated to us by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our Making Water Count program is a 40 million euro program that we mostly dedicate towards business development. That is through our innovation program and scaling program. We have structured our strategy along the scaling pathway. That is what we take as, you know, everything is dedicated towards getting new ideas to proof of concept, and from proof of concept to ready for investment. As a third pillar of our work, we closely work with investors. And we do that because we very much need to understand exactly how do investors look at the initiatives that are out there in the market. Because if you do not speak each other's language, and this is often what is lacking, there will never be that connection. So I'm going to give you a few examples of how we work together with investors and what kind of blended finance solutions we present and work on in order for entrepreneurs to get to scale. And what we have seen over the many years is that this part of the scaling pathway is often doable. We have expertise, we know how to do that. But to get to that last point of ready for investment, this is where the difficulty is. And this is where our interventions, and I mean from the sector, need to be focused on. Because if we somehow manage to create a pipeline at this point, then the link, the bridge towards investors is not going to be the hardest thing to do. When it comes to investors, what I've also experienced over the many years is that we need to make sure that by the work that we do, we create the benchmarks that they need, and we also need to create the indicators based on which they can make their decisions. And that is at this point still lacking. Here I'm talking about entrepreneurs, getting them to scale. But at the same time, and that was also beautifully mentioned by Sacha, we need to look at utilities. And whereas the very big utilities are very much dependent on trajectories that are funded by their Ministry of Finance, that again are funded by the World Bank, you often see that the smaller utilities really can fulfill a very important part. And if you look at what could be potentially privately investable, are there improvement trajectories such as non-revenue water or energy efficiency. And I'm working currently with a number of utilities to get them through a process of being able to reach out to their local banks to get these trajectories financed. But I'm giving you this example because that also applies to the sanitation sector. So what we feel at Aqua for All is that if you want to focus completely on this trajectory, you need to take a long-term perspective. And what I've also seen in working closely with many NGOs over the years is that the project orientation of our work is often too strong. So we need to move away from project thinking, because then our thinking stops at the end of the project. And so if we take that long-term perspective and always think like, in the end, everything that we do must end up somewhere here, then our interventions will change. I'm very strong about that opinion. So the examples that I'm going to give you, I'll present them in the next slide. Let's see how that works. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that was too quick. So the examples that I want to share with you here today are the ones that work on both demand as well as supply side. By demand side, an example was already given by Sacha. There we mean that households must be able to access financial services, either to construct their own toilets, have household connections, buy water filters, everything like that. And local financial institutions also are able to provide small and medium-sized enterprises with the much needed funding. This is often quite straightforward debt financing. And if we talk then about blended structures, we need to take that to a different level, but I'll get back to that specifically later on in the presentation. When I talk about supply side, is, for example, when there's direct investments in small and medium-sized enterprises. So the example that you see here is the Water Access Acceleration Facility. That is an initiative of Danone, and they have asked Incofin as their fund manager. We closely collaborate in the development of this facility with them, that hopefully will be launched soon, and has been delayed a little bit because of the COVID-19 situation that we're dealing with, of course. They will invest directly in safe water enterprises. Another example that we closely collaborate with is the Global Credit Enhancement Facility of Water.org. What they have structured here is a guarantee facility that then supports Indian banks that will be kicked off in India, Indian banks to continue to build up their wash portfolio and continue to lend at a lower risk to households and entrepreneurs. So at that side, you know, this is a demand side example. This is a supply side example. Another example is Take a Stake Fund. What you quite often see when you look at SMEs, the lower end of their needs, the patient capital, the long-term investments, all these kind of things that are very high risk, are often not dealt with. And even when you look at other segments such as agriculture, for example, all the investments between 500,000 euros or dollars up to 2 million are extremely difficult to get profitable from the perspective of an investor. So this fund needs to be completely organized in a blended structure, so to speak, in order for it to be successful. So this is on the investor market. And then when you look at the other examples, an incentive model, Finnish Mondial with their impact bonds and carbon credit financing, these are all meant for entrepreneurs to get to scale, to get ready for investment. I already touched upon, for example, the fact that the break-even issue is very big when you look at sanitation, but also kiosk models, for example, because the brick and mortar investments at the very beginning are extremely high. And so together with Root of Impact, and let me take another slide to explain that to you. That is this one. Together with Root of Impact, we really looked at how can we deal with the CAPEX and the OPEX, because quite many of the enterprises are able to cover OPEX, operational expenditure, out of their cash flow. So this is not where the problem is. How do we then deal with the fact that they are below break even because of the very high CapEx? And so this will be in itself a structured solution for an entrepreneur to deal with attracting funding. And the beauty of this is that even before complete break-even, they are already able to work with investors. Because I'll take one example of probably a company that you quite well know, probably. It's SuSanA from Ghana. What we see is that if you look at their investment trajectory over a period of, let's say, 5 to 10 years, what they say is that they hope to be able to break even in 1 year, but in the next few years, they might need between 2 and 3 million euros to really scale. And in 3 years' time, they would need an investment of, let's say, 25 million euros. If they only start to talk to investors in 3 years' time, it will be a hell of a job. Whereas if we already include investors at this point in time and find a blended structure in which, for example, we grant the CapEx and we let the investor be paid back out of the cash flow, which at this point in time is doable, then we already involve investors, and in 3 years' time, they will be able to say, look, you know, we already have a track record in working with an investor, and therefore, you know, it's much more likely that if they are at that point of scale, they're able to attract the funding that they need. If you look, for example, at the Global Credit Enhancement Facility of Water.org, the core investors IFC, Aqua All and some others have put in very high risk capital. And so what we do, as similar to the WaterAid example in Bangladesh, is we guarantee the financial institution, and then the financial institution also need to have a skin in the game, otherwise they become too loose in their judgment of whom to finance or not. They will be much more comfortable in on-lending. A similar structure during COVID times is what we set up, and I'm just going over it very high level because of lack of time. If you want to understand more details, I'm very happy to go into details besides the webinar through Dan or whatever. But this is a structure that we set up in COVID time with Citian Bank in Kenya. So what we have been doing is say, like, we do risk you at this very point in time together with DFC, and for you to be comfortable in on lending during COVID and responding to the increased needs in the market. And this is not the only thing that we did. We also plug in private sector players. Oh yeah, I can move you here. And for example, we collaborate with Davis and Shirtcliffe, who is a technical expert in providing equipment. We ask them to provide this at a reduced rate in order for them in order for the entrepreneurs to acquire this equipment to fulfill the increased need for water, but also sanitation services. Carbon credits is something else. Again, to the point of becoming break-even, what you quite often need actually is to have a second income stream. Whereas we often have a government that is able to complement these kind of investments, in many of the countries that we work in, that is not the case. So we feel that if we structure the use of carbon credits right, that could be a very, very valuable kind of second income stream, either for a sanitation organization or for example, a kiosk model. So there need to be some steps in place. The model for water and sanitation we're currently testing. We've done that with a number of companies in India, but also in Ethiopia. And once the model is out there and you get your credits verified, for example, by the gold standard, you can sell those credits in the market and the income can flow back to the enterprise. What I also wanted to highlight to you is on this slide. So I believe that if you decrease the investment risk that investors currently see, there's an automatic effect of increasing public and private funding. The way to do it, and it's very similar to the activities of WaterAid, is we could provide technical assistance, and that is needed to get organizations up to scale, but also in collaboration, for example, that with funds that are going to invest in enterprises, because they are often a little bit higher in the market. They service quite often middle class kind of interventions, whereas we feel that once we work towards a sustainable infrastructure first, we then use our technical assistance funding to do the extra mile with the kiosk models that are operating not necessarily directly with the base of the pyramid. So there are a few options how to use technical assistance. Then secondly, you could do co-investments, provide first loss or guarantees. We went over that in detail. And you can work on alternative financing models to overcome the obstacles that are out there in the market. And to the point of John, it's not only the funding that we need solutions that are investable. And these alternative financing models help these solutions to get to scale, and scale is what you need in order for investors to step in. Then I think I'm going to leave it at this, if you agree. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. This is just high over a few of the examples that we work on. And my call to the audience really is, you know, let's come up with solutions because this, where we stand in the sector, we lag behind and we need to speed up our interventions.
Thank you so much, Josien. There's so much to talk about there. And apologies for the echo on my line. I'm just going to hand back to Ada, who's going to lead the discussion with the whole group. And we're really excited to hear people's thoughts from across SuSanA. So over to you, Ada. I'm going to put the questions we discussed on the screen.
Thank you very much, Josien, Sacha, and Dan, and everyone else that's joined. It's an echo. Can I ask you just mute your mics if you're not speaking? Thank you. Yeah, so it's really been very interesting. You'd agree with me, and you know, when John started with the introduction, yes, we know it's not always running to the financing, and I think Josien has alluded to that fact and say, yes, there's so much more work to be done. But we will all agree, I'm sure, that financing is a critical element of this. No matter how well we build models and, you know, small pilot projects and stuff, we need financing to be able to take it to scale, and scale is what the SDG is really about as well, everyone, everywhere. So you see why we decided to focus on financing at this time and understanding other modalities. There's been, I mean, we know, those of us particularly from the civil society and NGO space, we know what's happening to the traditional funding space we used to have. And it's only important that we, you know, within the working group begin to consider this more seriously and see the alternatives that exist. So again, saying a very, very big thank you to our three presenters so far. And how the rest of the day we go, we've got a set of questions that we've put up here just to stimulate conversation. And typically, as we would have done in a working group meeting, if we're all together somewhere, in Stockholm today or something, people would be able to interact face to face. We want to make this experience as, you know, as close to that as possible. So for those who have typed questions already in the chat box, we will pick those up and put them alongside. But we wanted to use these 5 questions on the screen to stimulate our thinking and then to guide our conversation in this regard. So first of all, before we go into these questions, are there any questions? Anyone wants to take the mic to ask specific questions to the presenters? Vicky, I see there's a question you typed in already. You want to take the mic and speak? And anyone else, any questions or clarification? Just to also mention, and I forgot at the end, we've got Finn with us here from SuSanA Secretariat that is helping us. So just to acknowledge your support, Finn. I mean, yeah. Okay, Vicky, do you want to take the mic? Otherwise, I can just read the question from the chat box as well, if you do not want to. So Vicky had asked, oh, your mic is not working, sorry. His question is, how different is the blended financing concept with the PPP as public-private partnerships, I guess? So Sacha, do you want to give this a go?
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, sure. The difference between blended finance, ultimately, I mean, you can see them as 2 sort of different lenses as recognized to look at capital. The public-private partnership lens effectively distinguishes between money that has come from the public sector and money that's come from the private sector. The blended finance as a lens just distinguishes between concessional finance, i.e. non-commercial finance, whether it's come from the private sector or not, and commercial finance, whether, again, it's been provided by the public sector or not. Public sector, there are public sector investors that expect commercial returns, and vice versa. So again, it's a difference of lens. On the one hand, it's a difference of lens. PPPs distinguish between private finance and public finance, and blended finance distinguishes between commercial finance and concessional finance. But there's also an underlying structure. When you do a PPP, there is a structural implementation, meaning you have a PPP office that coordinates a lot of the work that happens between the public and private parties. It's very codified because when you're dealing with the public and private sector, one of the underlying responsibilities is to ensure a number of things, including value for money, which is a very important key aspect of, well, almost the core reason for having such an intricate structure as a PPP. It's a whole structure to ensure that value for money for the private sector is protected to the maximum extent possible. So again, on the one hand, it's the difference between the 2 is a matter of lens, how we want to look at capital, but also on the PPP side, there's a structural, well-documented way to arrange PPPs that, you know, the big development banks have sort of well documented, whereas blended finance can still be pretty bespoke. And actually, part of the beauty really of blended finance is that there are many ways to do blended finance, really, many ways to deploy concessional finance in its different forms and commercial finance in its different forms, whether it comes from the private sector or not. I hope I've been clear on that, and I don't know if Josien or anyone else wants to add to that.
I do agree completely with you, Sacha. It's also broader. PPPs are also what can you bring as an organization, and blended finance has to do with the different risk that is in one structure. But the confusion, of course, is there because quite often foundations or governments are able to bring in that concessional bit. And the concessional bit's not quite often from the commercial side. So I understand the confusion. Blended finance is purely on what levels of risk do you combine, whereas a PPP is more like a complete program or project.
I think I'd just add in there that very kind of strength of a blended finance approach in being able to, you know, structure things according to kind of need and to fit the situation is also quite intimidating an idea to people in the NGO sector, used to kind of being told exactly what a funder wants and dealing with all of that kind of idea that something will need to be designed collaboratively is quite a culture change. And it might be interesting to kind of hear people's thoughts about how different types of agencies who are not so familiar with these concepts and structures can make a contribution and help funders overcome some of the barriers that they see due to kind of lack of knowledge, etc.
I think that's a nice question that leads us right into that. I think question number 5 on the screen. Really, how can organizations and agencies really work together? If you can think about that, does anyone want to take the mic? And saying welcome to people who joined us just as we were about wrapping up the presentation. I see Arne Panise from GIZ. Welcome, Arne. Okay, Elizabeth, do you want to take the mic to ask your question? Elizabeth,
if people can write any questions down in the chat box, we can read them out.
Hello.
Hello, Elizabeth. Yeah, you're a bit faint, but we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, thanks so much. I was just wondering that a lot of money accrues to government in many countries to put in pipelines, but yet people don't get the water. Shouldn't we start looking at an household-focused approach? That was my question.
Okay, and when you say household approach, in what sense? Can you give more in terms of what you're thinking about?
We know in many countries now, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, a provision of sanitation and water supply is mostly household-based. As you are putting in your structure, you're thinking of how to get water, you're thinking of what to do with the sanitation. So that's what I'm saying.
Okay. My interpretation of that is like in context where you actually have to do your own water supply and your own sanitation system.
Yeah, how do we go around that?
Yeah.
How can households go around that? And if we want to be sure that people have this sanitation, how do households go around that?
Okay.
Since government is not able to provide the facilities.
Does any one of you want to take a first shot at this, and then I can also share my opinion later?
I'm happy to have a first go. I think, and thanks for the question, and to tie it to, I guess, the topic of conversation on blended finance and the interest of impact investors. I think I kind of alluded to this in my talk. There are contexts where having a more decentralized model makes sense rather than having a centralized piped system, perhaps a more decentralized sanitation chain. And so to have supporting sanitation businesses, off-grid sanitation businesses, to meet local demand, whether it's to close gaps or just accept the fact that there are needs for decentralized sanitation, off-grid sanitation, and can make sense. And part of our role is to make sure that the business case for those types of SMEs, often providing those services, are attractive to impact investors. I'm also reminded of yesterday. Josien was part of an interesting talk on innovative financing models yesterday, and I think the case of Danone communities supporting safe water enterprises. Again, this whole idea that having decentralized water enterprises where the whole value chain is located in one specific area, and building a business or an investable business around that can be a solution that is, context based. And again, I don't necessarily have the program expertise to determine which, whether between a decentralized model or a more centralized model, which one makes sense. But in those situations where we do decide that, hey, it makes sense to have to expand on the decentralized model, part of our role is to create the business case, as it were, and to de-risk the investment to allow for those enterprises to make sense, and to, again, to your point, provide finance to these, as you describe, household to household, so on a more decentralized basis. How do we make those SMEs providing that service more attractive to impact investors?
Thank you very much, Sacha. Thank you. I think that's very, I couldn't add more, because I was think about the decentralized models and how we can support those to, really get them ready or prepped as organizations and institutions ready for investment from impact investors as well. So I think you really have done justice to that question. Elizabeth, does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
If I may, Ada, in addition to that,
yes, please,
I think that I completely agree with Sacha that, if you compare the water and sanitation sector, for example, with the energy sector, when it's kicked off is when, access to energy is when we are looking at developing and investing in decentralized solutions. So I'm very convinced that this could also be something for the water and sanitation sector. But then again, from our side, it's very urgent to make sure that these are constructed solidly and get to scale. And this is why the investment fund of Danone is so important. And we need to start showing examples to the world that these could be very valuable solutions. And there's one other remark that I want to make, especially when it comes to sanitation. Many of the initiatives that we've been supporting were built up from grassroots level. But I'm now also looking with my organization to see if we can organize things differently on a larger scale, because there are quite a number of treatment plans that are big and are for industry, etc. Why don't we see if we can build an add-on to that it can more efficiently also treat waste from the sanitation service chain. So we need to start thinking creatively and not focus all of us on the same small grassroots level initiatives that are out there, because it appeared over the last 10 years that they have an extreme difficulty when it comes to scaling. So I think it's urgent for us to do that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm going to quickly call on Gary Rollins. I've seen your hand's been off for so long. And then after that, Dan. Gary, please take the mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, maybe dial it up a bit louder.
Okay, can you hear me?
Good.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is actually to sort of follow on from Elizabeth's question there, and the lady there who then followed that on, and quite correctly, many of these schemes are very large schemes and they're very good, but I put my information in the chat box there, and I have what we call a non-sewage sanitation system. That means I don't need any main sewers. That's all I need is a supply of electricity and a supply of water. That's it. And that can take care of a house, and it's within 1 day it can be installed, and multiple houses, so on and so forth. And Bill Gates has spent millions of dollars perfecting or putting this forward. We've now perfected it so it can be utilized in many places. And one of them is the communal places where, as you know, in Africa, open defecation is a major problem there. And with COVID-19, and by the way, this could be COVID-19 traced with water supplies. And the one thing I really wanted to put forward, and maybe somebody could sort of look at this, because everybody's looking for finance now, with DFID now virtually gone. But in 2008, the Iweni Declaration, sorry if I got the pronunciation wrong, in South Africa, had every country put 5%, 0.5% of the GDP to water and sanitation. That hasn't lived up to it, and I believe this is where money can be gleaned from in the future. But certainly, as I was saying, from my point of view, I have a project I'm working in Ghana at the present time, in Kumasi, and when that is when COVID-19 allows me to go back, that's where I will be going. But as I said, that this if anybody wants to contact me, my details, and I can send them the information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Just put your details in here, and we encourage you to join conversations on the SuSanA platform if you're not already there. But thank you. Yeah. Dan, did you have your hand up as well?
Yes, I did earlier. It's just, you know, again, an observation on the kind of, you know, general discourse that, you know, there are all kinds of different kind of national and regional and local models for sanitation, and they are, a lot of them are very debatable, and they're very much going to kind of vary in their strengths and weaknesses from country to country and geography to geography. But there's a wealth of expertise in this group, in the SuSanA network, that could potentially, you know, better guide these investments if people were more engaged with this kind of financing. And you know, no single impact investor can possibly, you know, be an expert in every facet of sanitation in every country they want to work in. So I really think it'd be nice to give some thought to how, you know, the wealth of expertise across, you know, a long-standing kind of sector of development and an even longer standing kind of, you know, sector of utility provision can really be brought to bear on the solutions that a lot of these kind of very socially minded impact investors would like to develop.
Thank you. Now back to the, I don't know, for some reason the slide with the questions is gone off the screen. Can you put that back on, Dan?
Oh, I will do it again. I think every time I click something, it disappears.
Okay. But then the question we were talking about, I mean, there is a question around what's been anyone's experience of using these financial models. Anyone online that wants to share your own personal experiences, maybe looking at what worked well and what kind of challenges did you face? Is there anyone online with that kind of experience? And if you don't, there is, okay.
Can you see the screen I've put up now, Ada?
No, I can't see it on my screen, but that's fine. Others can see.
In that case, I'll post the questions into the chat box.
All right. In the meantime, Kritika, Ramon, do you want to take the mic and speak? You work for a social enterprise. Oh, okay. Why don't you take the mic and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
So I'm Kritika from India. So I work with an organization called Piramal Sarvajal. We are basically a social enterprise that has gone with the mission since 2011. So we are placed at across 20 states in India, and we are providing water to over 7 lakh people. That is 700,000 people every day. So that is an everyday number. Apart from that, we also do projects in schools, etc. So our approach is basically a decentralized approach to providing access to water. And as you know, India has a lot of requirement for such a service, because I think all of us here understand that operation and maintenance of such systems in place is very difficult for both the government and the community to manage. So what we did was, we have a decentralized system which uses a purification technology, which includes the community in making decisions on how much they are willing to pay for water. And this is at a very nominal charge. It is, I'm not sure how much it is in dollars, but it is 30 paisa, which you can have a cross calculation and look at it and how much it is in dollars. So we offer it at a very affordable rate, because I think as an organization, and all of us maybe can agree on this point, that water is getting wasted a lot because they see it as a free resource, right? So that point being said, we try to offer our solutions to the poorest of the poor, and this has been enabled in a lot of the poor pockets in the country, wherever there is a need for access. And these are not just quality challenge areas where there is a problem of nitrate, fluoride, arsenic, iron, etc. These are areas with a quantity problem as well. So right now we are also looking at water conservation, wherein we look at making sure that the source is also sustainable at the end of the day, because over 50% of our sources are getting dried up, as per the Cape Town study that I think you all would have come across at some point, where they have predicted that over 50% of the cities in the world would dry up of, would have depleting groundwater source. So that being said, that has been our key initiative. But at this juncture, we have also been very active in terms of how we manage COVID and access to water by the communities, because as you know, I think if Indians are on this call, they would understand that they're...
You can just try to wrap up.
Yeah, sure. I'll wrap up. Sorry. So as you know, there was a lockdown, and we took several measures during COVID time, and we are also in the at the juncture of providing a WASH related curriculum, and we are working with other partners in the WASH related awareness. So that is who we are. So yeah, so I would love to connect with all of you post this, if that is what you also require. Thank you for the chance to speak.
Thank you very much, Kritika. Marco Foster, you have your hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I have a more general remark. Due to the magnitude of the challenge, and I'm skeptical about this approach, because we speak about the magnitude of about 100 billion investment, and Josien mentioned that less than 2 billion have been provided under per module. And I see two reasons why I'm skeptical. One is that governments in principle don't have money, they don't produce, they may get taxes. Now, a lot of the people lacking services, water sanitation services, they survive with less than $5 a day. So the profitability of services is very limited. And if you look at African towns or Asian towns, you find the better services in the middle class areas or wealthy areas, where the people have the money to spend on more comfort. But a lot of areas, I think, aren't real markets where people could participate in the financing. And the other thing that we have seen, oh, by the way, I'm from Ecopsis. We are a private consulting firm specializing on sanitation, mostly supporting governments for policies and strategies. So the other point is the impact investors. What are their preferences? What we have seen is that if there are real private companies, not funds like Bill Gates or Stone family or others, but real companies, when they try to translate their social responsibilities into real material commitments, they try to link it to their core business. So we have seen Levi Strauss or other companies supporting wastewater management in the textile industry in Nepal, India, and some other countries, Latin America, and other companies also like Danone, Nestle, they try to link their commitment with their core business because they depend on public reputation, public goodwill. So Nestle obviously is linked to water and so on. So sanitation is a nasty issue, and it's quite difficult to motivate private company to go public with investments in sanitation. That has been a little bit our experience. So I'm critical that this huge financing gap can be overcome with user funding and corporate investments only. I mean, what one can observe is there is a huge inequality in sanitation services. Rich areas get the service first, and
highly subsidized too, I must add.
Exactly, yes, and they pay the water 10 times less than on the kiosk.
Okay.
So that's a point. I'm skeptical that this is really the model to scale up the services.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for raising those very, very important issues, very, very important issues. And without wasting more, I think we both agree on the fact that middle class and rich areas get better quality of service and highly subsidized by governments that oftentimes don't have the money or the resources to provide for the poor. That's the paradox that we deal with, particularly with sanitation and with a lot of services, I would say. So I'll just hand over. Josien, do you want to say something about this? This is really, I think, pointing to the question that we put on the screen about the advantages and disadvantages of this kind of funding mechanisms. And in this case, a bit of distrust.
I can very much share the opinion of Mr. Marco. And of course, the gap is not going to be completely filled if we talk about user funding or corporates to become part of this kind of solution. However, I do believe that it is important to start and kick off these kind of interventions in this way. And what I indicated before is that currently it's also not there. So why don't we start to work alongside the companies that focus on middle class, and then with our technical assistance funding that is available to work with a then solid organization to work on the extra mile. I think, and you know, this is something that we need to test in the market, that this is a more solid approach than developing everything small scale, grassroots level onwards. And it doesn't take away the worries that you have, because I've seen it too. You know, poor people pay much more relatively for clean water than middle class people do. However, if you want to get clean water to people in slums and in areas that are not serviced by household connections, you need to have decentralized kiosk models, for example, that are able to offer that. If there's no government contribution, then they, in order for them to survive and grow, they need to be able to charge minimum cost level of their services. Otherwise, they will not be able to exist at all. But then again, it is difficult and we need to work on it. And inequality is something that we have to deal with. Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dan, do you want to say anything about this before, any more contribution? But Josien, thank you so much.
Just really the point that, the poverty, the customer poverty problem underlies absolutely everything. But I would sort of flip that on its head and make the argument that by working with viable middle-class serving companies, that's part of how you engage with economic growth and poverty reduction and try and nudge it in the right direction to help as many of the poorest people as quickly as possible by using whatever resources we have at our disposal to help them go the extra mile, like Josien says.
Yeah. Just one point. I work and live mostly in Brazil, and I'm involved in PPP, public-private partnerships also. And you have two ways to cross-subsidize poorer regions, or by taxes via government, or by higher tariffs and social tariffs for poorer people. But still, there are limits, because then the political environment, it depends a lot of the political environment, how this is applied and enforced. So still the poverty question remains a very critical issue for providing other services.
I'd add again, thank you, Marco, first. I think, it's something that, like Dan said, the sort of poverty of the customer base is clearly, the central concern really when trying to engage the private sector into the kind of work that we do. I would just add that I think when we think of blended finance, and again, I think I'm not going to try to convince anyone that the private sector is going to close the gap. I think the track record is what it is, but I think it would be, on the one hand, a shame to not try to engage with a growing audience of investors that want to engage in this space. So I think it's just on the one hand, there's an opportunity, but also I think the difference between blended finance and mere subsidy is that blended finance, the finality of blended finance is for ultimately the subsidy to go away. It has to eventually lead to a financially sustainable business, and there are many ways to do it. You can either do it like we said, on a decentralized model where the costs are so affordable that everyone in that particular area can afford it, or you go by scale, like Josien was saying, scalability in particular for the impact investing community is kind of important. If you get economies of scale, you obviously reduce marginal costs to provide the service, and therefore you help the affordability ultimately of your investment. So there are different ways to do it, but I think the central belief has to be, especially when you look at things with a blended finance lens, that the concessional capital will allow you to attract the kind of non-concessional, the kind of commercial capital that will, in the medium to long run, allow this to be viable, this particular business to be viable and affordable, whether you're doing it by economies of scale or doing it on a localized, cost-efficient basis. And again, I perfectly sympathize with the skepticism. Again, the track record is what it is. So I can't really speak either way, but I think there's clear an opportunity to be seized by the fact that a lot of people, you mentioned corporates that want to sort of meet CSR, their corporate sustainability requirements, or others. There's clearly an appetite to do more of this. And I think we're just trying to explore as efficiently as possible what our role as WaterAid and other NGOs can be in de-risking the interventions of these types of investors.
And I think that in addition to what Sacha is saying, is that when I explained the incentive model, for example, that will also yield information for governments, what margin is still required to get it to sustainable level. And by keeping track of what kind of compensation the government should be able to pay into these kind of systems, that will give useful information for governments to convince them, because at this moment this information is not available. When I had a conversation with the governor of Kenya, of Nakuru in Kenya, for example, I asked him, isn't it clear that, for example, cost in healthcare and education will be reduced if you invest in good sanitation service chain? And then he explained to me that, he says in our hospitals, 25% of the beds is occupied by waterborne diseases. So there will be a huge benefit if we invest in sanitation rather than in hospitals that take care of waterborne diseases. But then he also explained to me that, these kind of budgets are nationally allocated, whereas with my sanitation budget, I'm doing that on a county level. So this is also where things go wrong. But if we can, through our sanitation interventions, showcase that at least, hopefully, from 25, the rate will be reduced to 10%, then we can also make a case. And that is also with result-based finance. That yields so much additional information that could potentially convince governments to play their part in these kind of structures, that hopefully we will get, the whole system to the next level.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much for, this very, very expert and very well-informed, knowledgeable background to all of this, to help us, those of us that have not really been into blended financing before, to help us unpack and learn about this. I see the time is already 3 minutes past the hour that we should be wrapping up. I haven't seen any hand jumping up to say anything more. And then in the chat box, there's a question. I don't know who, Elizabeth, you're addressing this to in terms of, oh yeah, that's Kritika. Do you work with the academia? That's very direct, thank you. And Kritika, I guess, has responded. So I'm not sure if there's any more question, and I'm keen for us to keep to time, because these days there's so many meetings running and people might be running late to other meetings as well. Just to wrap up, I think we really touched on very, very important issues today. The session is recorded, so I won't keep you any longer trying to give a wrap up in terms of summary of the proceedings today, since we have it recorded. But just to say that within the working group, this has been organized by the working group 2 of SuSanA, and with support from WaterAid colleagues and Aqua All. So thank you, both WaterAid and Aqua All, for coming and bringing on board this, this very high, I don't know what to say, but really value the excellence and the high quality of presentation and conversations that you have brought on board in terms of unpacking this topic that is still, an emerging frontier for most typical development actors as ourselves. So really, really appreciate that. And specifically to the speakers, to Dan, to Sacha, to Josien, really, really grateful. In terms of next steps, as it relates to Working Group 2, for those that are members of the Working Group 2 on SuSanA, and if you are not a Working Group 2 member, Finn, is there a way to post a link on this channel for those who are not, in terms of finding how to get to Working Group 2, if that's possible at all? And but we will be putting these materials on YouTube for SuSanA's YouTube channel, and then, this conversation today, and then the Working Group 2, as just mentioned from the beginning, there are a series of webinars that we'll be planning looking at financing between now and the end of the year. So we might still come back to you, our great panelists today, in terms of taking those conversations forward. But to everyone there, so thank you very much, and wishing you a lovely evening, as we hope to continue the conversation in the working group. So we'll start the discussion, continue the conversation in the discussion forum and stuff. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ada. Thank you. Thank you, Dan and Sacha and John. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Namaste. Wow.